Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to this special MedHeads chat, which I'm going to call Deck the Halls but Not Your Family, tra-la-la-la-la, la-la-la-la. And for this special episode, we have our usual regular guest, Marie Eisma. Hello, Marie. How are you?
Hello. It's nice to see you with a hat on.
Well, thank you. I quite like it. I think we might keep it for the rest of the year. So there is a serious point to this, that a lot of people feel pressurized to have fun at Christmas. A lot of people actually go through trauma at Christmas.
Yes.
And Christmas, there's a huge expectation on the need to deliver.
Oh, yes.
And there's the potential for a large amount of unmet need, a large amount of trauma, a large amount of abuse, and basically it can be an utterly miserable time of year for some people. Because we don't all lead fairy tale lives, you know, we don't all have beautiful Christmases.
Exactly.
And that's what this episode is all about, is how do we get through this particularly challenging set of days? And it's, you know, one of the first things that comes to my mind is it's not even one day anymore. It can be bloody weeks. So how do you put up with it? How do you get through it? Because I hate Christmas. So tell me, help me get through this.
And I think you bring up a really, really good point. Not everyone loves Christmas. And we actually the invitation I often say to clients is meet yourself where you're at. And you touch on a really important thing. You know, sometimes people may or may not know, but I've worked in the area of trauma for a number of years. And, you know, we're often getting together with family members that have sometimes caused some of the biggest atrocities within families. The amount of survivors of trauma that I work with, who with Christmas is so triggering because they have to get stuck with somebody who was a potential offender, you know, whether that be through physical, sexual, some sort of abuse of some sort, or even straight out neglect. And so there's be a huge level of anticipation or anticipatory anxiety around Christmas, having to sit there and see, you know, a creepy uncle or a pedophile cousin, you name it. And you're right, we put this big, huge emphasis on one day when we probably are best to remind ourselves that it is actually one day out of 365 days in the year. The other thing that goes through my mind is that with the ever-changing aspects of family, more often than not, the days of us having a partner that we married when we were young and that person stays our life partner often doesn't happen these days. You know, we've got stats about relationships not working and we've often repartnered. And so we have this emphasis that on one day we're meant to go scurrying out of the house at 6 o'clock in the morning to try to dive around to all of these people, including blended family, and somehow still have, petrol in the tank come the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock visit for the last visit. And what we're starting to see is that Christmas, you're right, it isn't going to necessarily be a one day thing now. It's going to often be over a number of days to take the pressure off. Yeah.
And I mean, I could wax lyrical on the antecedents and the history of why we celebrate Christmas, why we, particularly on the 25th of December. A lot of people don't realize that actually the 25th of December date was developed or was paying homage to the fact that the Roman festival of Saturnalia happened in late December. And also, the date was set to kind of take hostage the birth date of the god Mithras, which was a very popular Eastern god at the time of Romans, and also was being worshipped by a lot of the Roman legionaries from the East. So even the date itself even though we celebrate it theoretically as the birth date of Christ, it wasn't, historically it's inaccurate. But you know, I mean, when I say that to my friends and relatives, they all tell me to shut up. So,
Well, I learned something again today, as I usually do when I do one of these episodes.
so we've agreed that there is a disconnect, right?
Yes.
There is a disconnect between the expectation of what Christmas should be in the fairy tales and what Christmas is for a lot of people.
Mm.
How do you cope with it? What are the
So,
things that we need to be thinking about?
so whenever I work with my clients, I often invite them to think about, when are they at their optimal? Is it really feasible to potentially go and see somebody in the family that you know is likely to trigger you when you don't have the resources, perhaps at the end of the day? If, you know, some people are more morning people, some people are more afternoon or evening people. And I always invite people to just tune in and actually ask themselves, when are they at their optimal? When have they got the ability to respond as opposed to react? So that's one of the first things I think about, is how can we, and I don't want to use the word manipulate the environment, but how can we try to get a win-win if we have to see people that sometimes trigger us or that we may not even particularly want to be around? It's one thing to see somebody, say there's one person out of a family of 10 that you don't overly get along with, but people want to make the effort for the 9 other people in that family. You know, I think I'm always inviting people to think about, you know, how can we get the best so that that one person doesn't become, doesn't become the trigger that actually, ruins the whole day. And sometimes that can be about, tuning in when you're at your optimal. The other
Yeah.
thing I'm always thinking about is, what are people doing as far as maintaining their own emotional well-being over Christmas? You know, it's not uncommon that the self-care rituals that people, ideally employ get put on the back burner. So people are often eating more of the stuff that they ordinarily wouldn't eat. They're often drinking, perhaps increasing alcohol or other things that they otherwise wouldn't be doing. And we need to realize that we've already got a system that is already stimulated. You know, our central nervous systems are already in often hyperarousal
Yeah.
because of something like Christmas. And we need to realize that as a biological aspect, when we start adding other things in there, it doesn't take much for the balance and the homeostasis to go out.
So we need to be very mindful of our self-care ritual, and we need to try
Yes.
and optimize the time that we're going to be most heightened.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And knowing if we're going to go and see somebody that we're likely to be triggered by, is it ideal to be going there in the evening after maybe people have already been drinking huge amounts of alcohol? That's
Yeah.
when we're
Yeah.
likely to say something that we're
Yeah.
going to end up regretting.
Yeah.
The other thing I also invite people to think about, especially for my clients that get a lot of things like anxiety and get overwhelmed in shopping centres, is a couple of people have come up with this really, really groovy idea where, I don't know about you, but sometimes we've got big families and we're, paying 20, 50, $70, all these little gifts that for people. And I've actually heard some families doing some really creative stuff where instead they'll put all the names into a hat and each person picks somebody out of that family. But the money that they would have then spent on all of these other, 10, 15, 20 people actually goes to that one person, but they actually get a purposeful, meaningful and potentially quite a valuable gift. But
Right.
when we think about energy expenditure, that person is no longer racing around to 20, 30 different department stores trying to find the nice candle, the nice
Yeah.
bottle of wine, and adding extra stress. And I actually thought, and I've shared that with a few clients, and they've actually come to really see the merit of it. Somebody really wanted a half-decent TV. That's what they
Yeah.
were going to ideally spend $700, but instead what's happened is they've spent all this money on all these other things, whereas someone's actually got something that they really wanted, not something that ends up in the, in the recycle bin, or worse still over in the, the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence bin the moment Christmas Day is finished.
Yes. Isn't that beautiful?
A
All of these
chutzpah,
Kris Kringle
but
presents get re-gifted ultimately.
they do,
So,
or eBay them. They're off on eBay the next day.
yes, just what I always wanted. Another egg basket. Okay, so One of the more serious points that I'd like to make, in my capacity as an addiction medicine specialist, is that I don't believe that if Christmas is challenging for you, that you should be tippling at Christmas. Because as you've
Yes.
said, you do need your wits about you. You do need your emotional resilience about you. And there's no denying it. Alcohol reduces your ability to cope with stressful situations. Now, a lot of people think that alcohol improves their ability to cope with stress. It may reduce performance anxiety, but ultimately it erodes resilience. So you need to learn how to deal with the performance anxiety in a way other than resorting to the bottle. Because when you go to the bottle, it just doesn't end up nice, does it? I mean, you've described to me before, as the day goes on, how the alcohol impacts upon presentations to ED. Tell us about that.
One of my absolutely cherished nurse friends actually told me that she never had to look at the clock to know what time of day it was on Christmas, because she would gauge that usually if she, first thing in the morning, it would be the kids opening up their Christmas presents, getting their skateboards out, their new Christmas gift, getting on their new push bike. And usually the incidences of what will happen will be the accidents that happen in response to new gifts at Christmas time. So that's usually your first round of presentations in the ED. Then there's the Christmas lunch where, Uncle Bert or, somebody ends up having, woofing into the food. And then all of a sudden it looks like, oh my goodness, is this a heart attack? When in fact it's probably a nasty bout of indigestion, but the person doesn't know that because now all of a sudden, they're feeling particularly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Then the next round of client presentations is usually the uncles, usually uncles, and I don't mean to sound gendered, or even sometimes aunties, I guess, who decide after a few drinks around lunchtime, early afternoon, decide to end up on the kids' skateboard or get on the kids' push bike and have a reconnection with their youth, usually resulting some broken arm or
In
a
a
broken
fractured
leg,
ankle.
fractured ankle, something that they're paying for dearly at the orthopedics department so many weeks later, and then they're off for the rehab at physio. And then it gets progressively worse. And of course, by 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, when everyone's really had enough to drink, then all of a sudden someone's presenting with a broken nose or a bruised eye or in some other really bad, nasty form of a severe assault or a concussion or a head strike, loss of consciousness. So that was always really humorous, but not really in another way. It was actually quite serious.
Yeah. So what we're seeing, from all domains of healthcare provision, is the impact of alcohol as the day goes on.
Yeah.
It's just another layer of grief and trauma that you just don't need on that Christmas day. Now, one of the things that you talked about was blended families, and I think we need to also explore this issue of the multicultural Christmas. And I'll speak from my personal experience. So I was born in Southeast Asia. I grew up in the United Kingdom, and then I emigrated to Australia. So when I was growing up in the United Kingdom, for me, Christmas was all about white Christmases, the cold, snow. It was about Christmas carols at a church the day before, and it was about opening up presents after lunch, after a hot meal with hot plum pudding and hot custard with a little bit of brandy in it for the kids and no more. And, and then basically watching the Queen's speech at some time. And then watching the BBC Two repeat of The Great Escape, or The Sound of Music, That to me was Christmas. Now, coming to Australia, when I first came to Australia, I thought that, Australia was basically a suburb of London. It's not. It's a separate country with its own unique identity and its own unique culture. And part of that culture is not eating plum pudding. At Christmas, it's eating prawns and barbies on Christmas Day with the sweat pouring off you in the blazing sun. And so for the first time in my life, I had to put on sun cream to attend a Christmas dinner. And I was wearing, instead of a suit, a shirt, jacket, and tie, I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a pair of shorts, burning my white skin to a cinder. It felt utterly alien.
Yeah, I'm not
Now, one of the
surprised.
things I've noticed is that, especially in blended families, you
Yeah,
imagine, an Indian mum and a couple of kids, and then an Australian father with a couple of kids, and the Indians celebrate Diwali, and then the other children celebrate Christmas. What
yeah.
does it all mean? How do you cope with that disconnect? And more importantly, what do you do about Santa Claus? So let's talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
blended families and then talk about cultural differences, and then we'll do the Santa Claus bit.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Blended families. Look, that in itself is sometimes I know this is going to sound very, hard for some people to possibly digest, but usually, you know, there's a thing around, I know I touched on this before, is around projection. And that is that thing where sometimes when we get triggered, our first reaction is to go, look what they've done, or, you know, it's about something that that person's done. What I've learned when people do sometimes more of their own inner work, when something like that does go on, but we can actually stop to just take a breath and go into ourselves and ask, what's going on for me? What's getting triggered in me here? That can sometimes shed a little bit of light on that it's actually potentially not about them, about something that's been stirred up in us. So, and this kind of leads into the thing around, the cross-cultural stuff. Like I've seen many people who have gone on and found a different religious, appreciation. And sometimes their families they've come from are aghast. It's like, how could they change their religious belief? How could they all of a sudden not be this way and go that way? How could they be influenced by this new love of their life that now they've abandoned these religious traditions and now moved on to something else? And I think in a lot of ways, it's not that really that dissimilar to your normal grief and loss trajectory that people do go through. In some ways, it's around adjusting that some people's individuation process is them actually then taking on saying, look, this is the family that I've chosen to be in connection with. This is that there's actually a surrendering in letting people make choices, even if they go up against the ones that you would ideally make or highly hope for that person. And sometimes, it doesn't have to be the grief and loss of somebody dying. It can be the grief and loss around the binds that thread us together starting to lose their thread, and that can be very, very disabling and very disorientating to families who are particularly traditional.
So how do you cope with that? What kind of techniques can you use to realize that actually it's more important to understand how you're reacting to a potential behavior or a trigger from somebody else?
Yeah, so I use a lot of the grounding techniques, and I think there's a fundamental small part in us at no matter where we are that is actually okay as we are. The more that we can actually put aside all of our scripting, put aside all of our beliefs, you often find, and I know you do a lot of mental health stuff too, Fergal, but you know that we've all got core beliefs. We've all got these beliefs about ourselves that have been formulated from quite a young age. And usually these core beliefs get triggered in certain social realms and contexts. And
Right.
sometimes we just need to really realize what echo from our past is getting stirred up, because when we realize that it's archic, that it's historical, we don't have to let it run the show and make us wobbly in the here and now. But it
Right.
does take that higher order thinking to be able to see that, and
Right.
sometimes that's a process.
And that process cannot happen. You cannot go to therapy on Christmas Eve to prepare you for Christmas Day.
No.
You do need to plan for this, and Christmas Day, is going to be, it happens every year, so you can plan for it during the year. Now, one of the things, now I've had personal experience of this actually, that I've gone to Christmas parties and I've asked the mums of kids, oh right, so what's Santa bringing the kids today this year? And mum has looked at me stony faced saying, we don't celebrate Christmas. Santa Claus doesn't exist.
Mm, mm,
What
yeah,
do you do there?
the awkwardness.
It's important to emphasize that for some people, Santa Claus is actually a damaging social construct. You know,
Yes.
for some people, they don't tell their kids the fairy tales because they feel that they're lying to their children. So there is no tooth
Yeah.
fairy, there is no Easter bunny, and there is no Santa Claus.
Yes.
I don't think there's any right or wrong, but I think people need to understand that, and people need to respect the customs of others. But personally, I don't know. What do you think?
And I agree. I think that some people that's what they've decided, that they do not want to be. Some people do not want to be indoctrinated in anything. They really
Yes.
have the position that they do not wish to mold their children in one way or another. The one thing that, and I'm glad you mentioned about, you wearing your addiction hat before, is that, I wanted to take a moment to sit in my social work hat. And that is that for many children who have come from disadvantage, when they get to school or they catch up with their peers and they say, so what did Santa get you? And we've got some children who are saying, well, Santa bought me a new iPhone. Santa bought me an iPad. Santa bought me some whiz bang, $1,000 cubby house.
Yeah.
And what that actually does for children, and this is something that I say this from a big place of compassion, is to highlight to parents that they're actually better off saying that I've bought this, rather than letting it look like Santa is actually being discriminatory. Because for children, they can't understand why one Santa, the same supposed Santa who's going down everyone's chimney, has given one set of kids down the street the
Mm.
iPad, the iPhone, the $1,000 cubby house, and for
Yes.
them, they've got a colouring book.
Yes. I couldn't have put it better myself. An iPad versus a coloring book. Now, it's also important to note that actually Santa, this idea of Santa Claus riding around overnight, visiting everyone and bestowing gifts on all those who were good, actually derives from the legend of Odin riding on his horse Sleipnir on the midsummer nights. So, or sorry, the longest night of the year, and looking down on all the good people, bestowing gifts and punishing those who were bad. So again,
Yes,
it's not very Christian, is it? So
not at all.
no, it's not. So we do take on traditions that
Yes.
if we understand where they come from, maybe, I don't know, does it take away some of the magic? But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's important that kids are not discriminated against. And yeah, so do you advise people then, apart from saying, well, I bought this rather than Santa, do you advise parents to discuss Santa Claus in any other way?
I think it's that, look, most children will have started to work out really what's going on. I'm hoping this doesn't get aired to children and take away their magic. Um, but yeah, I think it's very much a very much a family perspective. And when I say that parents should be telling their children that what they've got is from them, that's not to say, if they really want to, of course, put something together in the stocking. But I think we just need to be really conscious about what are we putting in this, what are we stuffing in the stocking that we're going to say Santa's given, when in fact it may be better off if them actually saying, hey,
Mm.
we got you the expensive gift, but Santa has also given you
Yeah.
something as well.
You say that most kids work it out. I didn't work it out. My mother had to actually tell me, and then she went into great
Oh,
detail to explain how it was her hair that she plucked from her head that was Rudolph's hair, and my father ate the mince pie and the brandy, and the calf carrot was eaten by the mother, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. I was,
look, I have to sit there and say, the threat about Santa not coming over Christmas is probably and I have to say, so many people and so many parents use it. Get into bed, otherwise, we're going to have to write a letter to Santa to say, don't deliver to this address.
yeah. I'm not sure how well that works though as an admonishment. So ultimately, I mean, we know that Christmas is a very stressful time of the year, and it is a social construct, and it's part of the culture that we've evolved from.
Yeah.
What do you do when you just can't manage it? You can say no.
You can say no, and no is a complete sentence. More often than not, I'll see people saying the word no, and then they scramble around for a justification. And if we can honestly just take a breath and go, no, and just look, I think that's important. The other thing I always invite clients is to give themselves an out. A lot of anxiety can be mitigated if we give ourselves permission to say, look, you know, I've got a cat that needs antibiotics every 3 hours. I've got to get home to the dog that needs to be let out. I need to check in on my neighbour who's not so well. She doesn't cope well with Christmas at all. And to be able to say, look, I'm happy to do an appearance. Even if you can, sometimes even organising where you're stuck sitting at the table can be helpful. Some people like to get in there early so they can actually pick not the designated seating, but they can actually get so they're not stuck with somebody who's going to potentially trigger them and that they're trying to sit there and cut into their turkey while someone's actually driving them crazy opposite them.
When I try and orchestrate seating arrangements, I always end up being sat next to the person I particularly want to avoid. I don't know why. The fates conspire against me, but the one person who I really detest always ends up sat right next to me. And I just think, what have I done who have I offended in God's earth that I actually have to go through this?
Did you sort out the seating arrangements?
Well, the seating arrangements in my Christmases or in fact any of my social functions aren't really predefined, and so you kind of sit there at one edge, hopefully, and then invite people to sit next to you, and then they move off and say hello to someone else, and then by the time the person I want to avoid, who arrives late, there's only one bloody seat left, and that's next to mine. I'll never forget it. It happens all the time for me. But yes. The social out, and what I find hilarious is actually watching people argue about the social out. So I'll give you an example. So, I need to get home because I need to feed the cat. I've heard people have arguments about, well, tell you what, I'll drive home for you and feed the cat for you, so you can stay and enjoy the rest of this Christmas party. And then, the first person's utterly flummoxed. So what I would say is, if you see someone giving a social out, accept it for what it is, and don't, out of a sense of charity or hospitality, pull that social out away from someone, because I have seen outs become more and more and more and more ridiculous. Just accept the fact this person wants to go and let them go in peace.
Yeah, that's right. And ask ourselves, what are we holding on to? What aspect in us can't we relinquish here? What part do we
Yes.
feel that we're needing to grab onto? Because,
Yes.
when we allow people to be because they genuinely want to be, it's a very different feeling of somebody being there out of a sense of genuinely wanting to be there rather than obligation. People get the
Yeah.
best out of people when they're there because they genuinely want to be, because they're there without expectation
Yes.
and they're there without pressure. And I don't know about
Yes.
you, but when I'm in my free space, that's when people will get the best out of me. If I feel like
Yes.
I'm shooting on myself. And look, the other
Yes.
thing is, so many people somebody will offer, say, look, can I bring something to share? Or can I take the load off by doing this? And I've seen so many people go into their scripty behavior, such as, no, it's my job to get rid of all of the Christmas wrap. No, don't worry, I'll put it all on. And they've put this whopping great big feast on. And they could have taken away some of the pressure on themselves, that the moment the car starts idling in the driveway and they go off, then they start bitching. Well, I don't know why I did this. I'm exhausted. I put myself through this. We have to really ask ourselves, what games are we playing with ourselves before we set this up? Because
Yes.
the bitterness and the resentment often happens when it could have all been avoided if they when somebody said, would you like me to bring the trifle? Would you like me to bring some of the salad? People have been so
Yes.
stoic going, no. Let's really work out how we can be kind to ourselves and actually take the pressure off and potentially swallow some aspect of ego and be okay with that.
And kind to others.
Yes, and kind to
Chris.
self, because when we're kind to ourselves, we're more likely to be kind to other people. That's
Yeah.
compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's Christmas is coming up. I hope you
Yes.
survive your Christmas. And
So
with
do
some
I.
of
I
your
hope you
words of
survive
wisdom, I hope that I survive my Christmas, or rather, I hope that my wife survives my Christmas, because it's her that has to deal with most of it. But thank you so much, Marie, and I look forward to chatting with you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong. Thank you for joining us on this festive episode of MedHeads. Stay safe, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. See you soon. Bye-bye.